I'll take you just a quick journey through the life, I suppose, to see where it ended up, to where that state was. I was a normal child and stuff like that, and at the age of 5, soldiers come to... I'm emotional about this.
So were you actually from the area?
No, I was in...
let him answer the question.
Yeah.
I was taken by soldiers at the age of 5 and for the Roman forces then. I was born in Sicily, and that's where I was taken on that island there, and just pretty much... there's lots of kids like that too. I didn't realise till recently about that. And they just pretty much detuned you emotionally, raped and beaten, and just all that sort of stuff, you know, typical soldier things they do to people just to make them dehumanise them, I suppose. And then just had this big loss of love from my mother and family and stuff, and just kept on hoping that someone would come and take me home. And that never happened. And then just sort of hold on to hope, and then it just, to me it felt like it was a rock, the only rock I had to hold myself together, and then it slowly wore away to like a stone, then just a pebble, and just in some moment just all realised it's never ever going to happen, and just everything fell apart and just succumbed to where I had to be. There was a lot of rage and anger inside me towards my mum particularly, but also towards all the soldiers, towards everybody really, and so I became a pretty nasty person. I forwarded off to that time. When I saw this guy standing around talking, it just started to, just this small glimmer of hope was still left in my heart about love. There's still a concept, mate, I just thought it was all bullshit. It's just a bullshit concept. It's just a lie, it's just a total lie. Then when I heard him speaking, it just started to resonate with something in me. I didn't know what, and just go away my own little times when I had time to myself, usually sleep time I suppose, and just like trying, like some things would come up, was starting to stir things, and I didn't understand it, and to go and sort of hear him more, and just started stirring a lot of stuff up inside of me, and realising, you know, everything that's happened I suppose, and what I've become. Because I wasn't a nice person at all either. I'd kill people, innocent people, rape people as well, hurt children, all from the anger that was like, I obviously didn't know how to deal with it, and just had such rage at the world. I didn't want any, if I couldn't be happy, no one could be happy. It's not possible, it's not real. And I've actually had some spirits come back now that I start to accept my identity a bit more, and had a sense about them, and they've come and, like, one of them is really still angry with me, still in a bad spot 2,000 years ago. There's a lady as well that I raped back then. She was still in a bad state, but she's doing pretty good now after talking and stuff. But yeah, so just after seeing him, I suppose, it started to stir things up and started to change me a little bit inside. Started looking at my emotional side, I suppose, again. It was still just, it was pretty much a flame gone out, but it was just a little spark left on the wick that come up again.
The Roman army used to take children from their parents who they felt would have good genetic stock at a very, very young age, and basically beat them and rape them and do all sorts of things to just dehumanise them into just a fighting machine. And that was basically Corny's upbringing, if you like, from the age of 5 onwards.
So about what age were you when you first saw a Christ and was doing the crowd control?
This dude?
Yeah. What age were you when you first...
It's been a lot. There's time in Syria for a while in the Balkans, and come down to Caesarea. Just political stuff going on, which brought a lot of troops into Jerusalem. They usually had auxiliary troops that didn't need proper forces there, so there's some political stuff going on that required them. And from Syria, it's somewhere like, I don't know for sure. I don't really care about ages, but it would have been around probably in the low 30s. So I died at 34. Yeah.
You see some experience if you were in the position you were in.
Yeah, because it was only from Syria, that's when I became an optio, which is a sergeant, and then from not long after that became a centurion.
Corny was a huge man, like he was 6'4" and even more solid than he is now, and had his huge hands. I just remember his hands a lot from
I remember yours too.
And yeah, so you know, he was just this huge fighting machine, really.
He would have been standing a foot taller than anybody at the back of the crowd.
Well, back then too, people were generally a lot shorter than they are now.
Yeah.
So to be 6'4" back then was like you were a giant, you know. And yeah, just you know, he was bigger than 2 ordinary men. Yeah. And but muscle.
Corny, can you tell us something about your conversion process or your decision to teach and afterwards?
Teach? I didn't teach anybody.
Teach?
Nah.
Did you make any decision after your experiences with Jesus that?
Well, decision.
Well, perhaps we should skip back and answer the lady's question about my own death, and then because it's all related as to what happened to Corny as well. So what we'll try to do is we'll describe these events from both of our perspectives, because we were both obviously involved in the events leading up to my death. So I'll start about a week before my death. I felt I needed to be in Jerusalem. It was the time of the Passover, and I just felt that it was a good time for me to be there. I also had a feeling that things perhaps weren't going to be as good as what I'd hoped them to be. But what was happening behind the scenes is many of the so-called disciples and apostles were not understanding the message that I had, and they also felt, as do many people today actually still feel, that I don't know what I'm talking about as much as I should know. And so they had this feeling that, you know, they wanted me to be the king of the Jews still on earth. And so they started to actually organise some things behind the scenes without my being aware. And what they would try to do is they would try to organise conflicts between myself and the Jewish Sanhedrin. And so that sort of come to a peak during that week of the Passover being in Jerusalem. On the day of my arrest, I'd spent most of the day in Jerusalem speaking in the temple, and there were huge amounts of outcries because a few days earlier I'd caused a riot in the temple. So you know how when it talks about the money changers turning over in the Bible, there's a section in the Bible that talks about that I went through the whole temple tipping over everybody's tables that they had money on and animals on them. What used to happen is they used to have all of these animals in the temple itself, like a slaughter yard really it was, that people would have to buy because they were consecrated, and so they'd charge 10 times the amount that they'd normally charge for that animal, and the person would have to buy that animal, and then they'd slaughter the animal as a sacrifice for their sins, and the priesthood would get the animal and eat the animal. So it was also part of how the priests survived, right? So the temple was just like in the courtyard, just totally covered with animals, and it stunk like a slaughter yard, really. It was just terrible, and I often made comments about it when I went to Jerusalem. And this particular time I made a comment about how everybody was you know, buying things at 10 times the price that they needed to, you know, and that wasn't, you know, that was so unfair. And all I did was say that. I stopped everybody first and then said it, and it just triggered some things in everybody, and everybody went nuts. Like they all just felt all of that injustice all in that instant, and then there was just a riot in the temple. So they went through tipping over all of the money, stealing the money from the people who were selling, and all sorts of things went on. And of course the priests were highly concerned because they felt that I'd begun it. I wasn't involved in it myself, so I didn't actually do any of the things described in the Bible. All I did was just say the words. Anyway, that caused a big uproar, and so the next few days I was in the temple, I'd get lots of criticism from the priests. And then behind the scenes, there's also my disciples trying to organise these conflicts, if you like, between myself and the priesthood. And so, no matter what I did to act lovingly, many of the people who were following me were trying to stir up even more trouble. So and I'd try to address it with them, but but they wouldn't listen either because they wanted me to be the king and so forth, and it got out of hand basically. And so by the day of that I was captured, I was hiding out actually in the Garden of Gethsemane, and I'd asked some of my friends to just keep a watch out for me, so that I could leave in time. And but I also was praying a lot about the fact that nobody seemed to be getting the truth. Even my own disciples, the people who were following me, weren't getting the truth either. And I was praying a lot to God about that, about how I could prove the truth to them, rather than just speak the words and they not get the truth at all. And I could feel that things were just coming up to a boiling point, really. And so eventually Judas, and if it wasn't Judas, it would have been one of the others, organised for the Sanhedrin to actually come and capture me. And they wanted me out of the way by this stage. They'd already had 2 attempts on my life previously that were done with an assassin, but both of them failed. And so this time they wanted to make sure of it. So they actually arranged Judas to come up and show them who exactly I was in the dark, because it was dark. So that's how I was captured. And he thought that I would fight. He thought that I'd encourage the disciples to fight. So he thought that the way he thought was that he was encouraging an uprising, that I would then eventually take my full control as the leader and everything would be fine. That's how he thought. He didn't realise that no matter how much I said to him the opposite, he didn't realise that wasn't going to be what I would do. And he was just so shocked when I responded passively. And that's what eventually caused his suicide. He was just so shocked at my own response. Because he was a very good friend of mine as well, and still is actually a very good friend of mine. He's in the celestial spheres now. And then there was a big, basically similar to what the Bible describes. I went back and forward between Herod and Pilate, and eventually got into the hands of this man. And basically, Mel Gibson's The Passion, who's seen that? Most of you have seen that. Most of what's described in there is fairly accurate.
And I suppose a question you're asking, I think there was no healing, but my job was to nail him to the stake, which wasn't a cross. It's like a pole sort of thing. And so nailing, had a spike and was nailing the mallet into his hands, and saw his eyes, and just looking at me just full of love, and that was just enough. I had enough then. So much stuff was stirring up. I just threw the mallet down, just walked off, which pretty much gave myself a death sentence too from the Roman army. Just entered, you're dead. And I don't know what happened in that scene after I just walked off and went into sort of hiding. There's someone, I haven't figured any of this stuff out because I've got this feeling, but I haven't got into anything, so I haven't got the emotional side of it. And it's coming up soon, I can feel it. But there was a woman I knew. I don't know the connection with her though, like what she was to me. Someone close, which is unusual. And she hid me for 2 weeks until they found. I had a friend, used to be a good friend of mine, in as a soldier. His name was FAL, and but earlier on we used to fight together and be quite close to each other. We both went through the same experiences as a kid in the same way, and we grew quite a bond. You have to love someone, sort of thing. You had a good friend, and you had to share something out of yourself. And this is way back, but they could sort of, we had to keep it kind of quiet. Like we might just sort of like nod to each other, sort of thing, let you know you're okay, mate, sort of thing. But then they started picking up and all that sort of stuff, and they just would not have any of that. Any sort of niceness didn't happen, so they separated us, went to different sort of legions and stuff like that. And But I think they set up stories, you know, to try and pit us against each other, to create hate back in us again. Like they pitted words, and we could never never find out if it was true or not, about if that person said that against you, sort of thing, or they'd done something and put you in, like, got some punishment for that, like you hadn't done anything. And so this hate grew between us, or slowly, and you could never find out what the truth was. But because there's already hate within us, it's pretty easy to like trigger it. So back to my last 2 weeks of my life. I think have a funny feeling he'd like dobbed me in where I was, sort of thing, and they come and found me, soldiers, and yeah, led me away. There's a crowd, just crowds of people. It's being such a big person, and everybody in that time just feels so powerless. Everybody wanted to have a piece of me, basically, just everybody, and I just would not give in. Just kept fighting and fighting and fighting. I was taken to an open public area and just beaten and beaten and beaten and beaten. I think I had my back broken because I can't remember any feeling in my legs. And they speared me to the ground through my shoulder. I speared to the ground and had fingers cut off, tips cut off. They actually ripped open my stomach and started all intestines spilling out, sort of thing. I just lay there for 4 days until I eventually died. But I remember the last thing I saw, the last thing I remember in my body too, was my breath. Just all I had that told me I was still alive. And you could just hear the last breath just eventually just was gone. But I remember the saddest, or sad for me, because the last thing I saw was my mother's eyes in the crowd. You could just see her like down low between her legs, just looking, and you just see the love still that was there. So from the start of my life to the end, the rest of my term was just a lot of bullshit. Love was actually real. It took that long to find it out. And I just thought it was all fake, just a lie. That's all the stuff that happened to me told me it was. I just believed everything that happened. And the same thing too when I passed in the spirit world. After hearing what Jesus was talking about, to everybody, had this belief that you go to a place of heaven, and it was just another load of crap. We got to some place that was really horrible, just full of darkness and just cold, and there's no one around. I think because I didn't want anybody around, and just in a heap for about, I think it was roughly 70 years or something, just lying on the ground curled up, and just didn't want to be around anybody, just hated everybody, hated the world. Just went to a place because of things I'd done that were it's not a very nice place. And it took that long. It took so long until I eventually wanted to face some of the stuff. And I remember somebody coming up, I'm not sure who it was, I think it was a guide that I had during my whole life. And they just come down to help me up, just took my hand and just sat up on my knees and just wanted to listen at last. Just surrendered after fighting and still fighting in the spirit world. Just fighting against everything I felt, fighting against all things that happened, not letting it come in emotionally. When that time changed or I wanted to feel it, that's when things started to move again.
So I watched Corny getting tortured from the spirit world. And it was a really horrific death that he had.
It was made as an example for any others to dissent the Roman army, any others that any population, people that want to have a fight against them. It was showing a force, just letting everybody know they're under control.
And he basically, what's the word when you get out of an army without getting approval to get out
Dissent,
of
is it?
Absent without leave.
AWOL. No, there's another word.
Deserter.
Deserter, yeah. So he was treated as a deserter. Yeah.
So really, the experience of Cornelius should give us a lot of hope, because he went into the hells,
Yeah.
and he progressed to the 22nd sphere
Yeah.
to allow him to combine and come back here. So I guess we all, treat you, I know you say you're ordinary, but he's still special to us.
Yeah.
Whereas Cornelius is a stranger to most of us, I guess.
Yeah.
And it's just a wonderful feeling that listening to your early history, it gives me a lot of hope.
Well, it is for everybody, because there's so many people who've had horrible lives and stuff, and but a lot of that stuff, in my life there was love at the start, and actually love was real at the end. That's what I found out. That's right at the end, and just all that crap in between was nothing I could enjoy because I didn't know the truth.
But he passed into the hells because of all of the terrible things that he'd done in his life, and had to work through all of those things emotionally. And he was the, I think his soul pair was the 4th soul pair to enter the 22nd sphere state. So after coming from that kind of a background on the earth, being the 4th soul pair to enter the 22nd sphere state, you can see his strong desire for love, once he connected with all of that. And and that's a very unique experience. Of all the 14 that have returned, Cornelius has probably had one of the most unique experiences of all the 14 who have returned, in the sense that of all the 14 who have returned, many of the 14 entered the hells when they passed, but only for very brief periods of time. And so, it was his experience is probably, he had the worst experience in the hells that all of the 14 have experienced.